Okay, welcome everybody to our NHHIP community workshops hosted by the City of Houston Planning and Development Department and Harris County. A little bit of housekeeping here. Welcome to the meeting. We will use the chat for Q&A. So if you have any questions during our question and answer sections, or if you have any questions come up at any point as we go along, just type them in the chat and we will answer them when we get to those parts of the meeting. Mandy?
Buenas tardes a todos. Yo soy Mandy Chapa. Por favor, déjanos saber en el chat si gustas traducción para esta presentación en español. El chat se encuentra en la parte de abajo de la pantalla del Zoom.
Okay, we are providing Spanish translation if somebody needs it. So far, we haven't actually had anybody ask for it yet. Okay, today's agenda. The first hour of this meeting will be a presentation. We will talk about the mayor's letter and the county resolution, followed by a Q&A, and we will talk about the TxDOT's final environmental impact statement, followed by a Q&A. For the second hour, we are going to have breakouts. When you signed up, you had a choice to sign up by breakout. You will be put in those breakouts, and you'll have a chance to talk to others, including our team, as well as technical experts about topics in the FEIS. So that will be our setup for today. We're very happy to see all of you here. And with that, I'm going to pass this off to Margaret Wallace Brown, Director of the City of Houston Planning and Development Department, and Peter Key, the Interim Executive Director of the Harris County Toll Road Authority. Margaret, I think you're muted.
Good evening, everybody. I am so grateful that you've joined us here tonight. My name is Margaret Wallace Brown, and I'm the Planning and Development Director for the City of Houston. And I just want to share with you, over a year ago, Mayor Sylvester Turner asked the Planning and Development Department to facilitate a series of community dialogues on the North Houston Highway Improvement Project, TxDOT's planned reconstruction of I-45. Since then, we have been helping Houstonians understand this generational project and finding ways to ensure that it serves all of us. This week's meeting is the third round in that process. We will tell you how your feedback was reflected in a letter of requests that Mayor Turner wrote to TxDOT in May, and how the agencies are now working together to incorporate those requests through additional designs. We'll also explain some of the finer points of the environmental process, which TxDOT kicked off in 2017 and is nearing completion now. For these meetings, we are excited to partner with Harris County, who have joined our technical review process team. I'm now going to pass it off to Peter Key with the Harris County Toll Road Authority. Peter?
Good evening. My name is Peter Key, and I'm part of the team that Harris County has established to provide leadership and a voice for our community, our county, to help hopefully guide the North Houston Highway Improvement Project into a project that works with and for all members of our community. Harris County first wants to convey its thanks and its gratitude to the public and our neighbors for taking their time this evening to engage in the development of this project. We also want to thank Harris County Commissioners Court, Harris County and City of Houston staff, and our consultant team for organizing and facilitating this important public meeting, particularly in light of the logistical challenges that we are all confronting during the COVID-19 pandemic. This meeting is part of Harris County's promise to effectuate meaningful public engagement for significant infrastructure projects in our community. And Harris County is committed to fulfilling that promise throughout the North Houston Highway Improvement Project's development. To that end, the North Houston Highway Improvement Project is a project being led by the Texas Department of Transportation. It is not a Harris County-led project, but we share a responsibility to help our community engage with the Texas Department of Transportation during their formal 30-day FEIS comment period. And we have a responsibility to engage on the project's future development, all of which Mr. Spieler and his consultant team will explain in further detail this evening. In closing, while we continue to advocate for an extension beyond the 30-day FEIS comment period, which expires on November the 9th, we are grateful for the Texas Department of Transportation, Metro, and the City of Houston's willingness to collaborate in an accountable and transparent manner to help the North Houston Highway Improvement Project evolve to realize, embrace, and ultimately incorporate the common goals and benevolent values that many members of our community in Harris County share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter and Margaret. So I want to underline those points. This is not a TxDOT meeting. Nobody who is here from the city or the county or Hewitt-Zollars or University of Houston CDRC, none of those of us who are running this meeting are able to speak for TxDOT or represent TxDOT. The purpose of this meeting is to help you understand this project and to bring you up to date on the city's efforts. But we are not the ones designing this project. We are not the ones who wrote this environmental impact statement. And to emphasize that point further, we are not the ones who need to hear your comments about the FEIS. We'll be talking about how to comment on the FEIS, but the key point on that is those comments need to go to TxDOT. And simply because you say something in this meeting does not mean that TxDOT gets that comment. So all of our breakout discussions today, this time around, we're not taking notes in order to record all of this. This time around, these sessions are there to help you as the public respond to TxDOT. Secondly, there's two things happening in parallel here. There's a process for additional designs and further refinement of the design of this project. And there is the FEIS. These things are happening in parallel, and this can get quite confusing at the fact that we seem to have these two different things going on. We are covering both, but realize that they are at this point separate processes. Okay, so I'm Christof Spieler. I am Director of Planning at Hewitt-Zollars. We are a consulting firm here in Houston, and we are part of the technical team for this project. So what we have going on here is we have a team consisting of Hewitt-Zollars as well as the University of Houston Community Design Resource Center, led by Susan Rogers, who are the technical team for this project. We are working with the City of Houston and Harris County. I will say this is a pretty unprecedented city-county collaboration here, with funding from the Houston Endowment through Houston Parks Board, as well as from Harris County. So that's who you see running this meeting today, and that's who we are. And as you are in all of these sessions, if you see one of these yellow backgrounds behind us, it means we are part of the city-county Hewitt-Zollars CDRC team. So I want to start today by talking about the mayor's letter and the county resolution. We got lots of input from the public over 2 rounds of public meetings over the last year. The city started the facilitation group, which is a group of community stakeholders that now meets regularly, in April of 2019. There was a series of joint City of Houston TxDOT public meetings in June of 2019. The technical advisor team, including CDRC and Hewitt-Zollars, was brought on board in July of 2019. We had community workshops in segments 1 and 2 in August of 2019, community workshop in segment 3, November of 2019, a second round of community workshops in January and February, which then led to a series of recommendations to TxDOT. This whole process has been driven by an immense amount of very dedicated public input. We've been blown away by the number of people who have participated and by the thoughtfulness of the responses we have gotten. And we enormously appreciate everyone's time. We know that everybody has more enjoyable things to do than dig into the details of freeway projects. But all of your input has resulted in, I think, some very meaningful response to this project. We held those 3 workshops in that second round of workshops, plus we held a virtual online workshop. And based on those, we were able to get community preferences on a series of alternatives which we had developed in response to the concerns we heard about this project and the ideas we heard about this project in the first round of meetings. The mayor set a goal. We started this with Sylvester Turner saying that this is a potentially transformative project and that it is TxDOT's responsibility to design a project with positive impacts for the community, the city of Houston, and the greater region. And we will, without hesitation, not support the project if these items are not accomplished. And we heard very similar messages from Commissioners Court as well. And the city approached this project looking at a whole series of different goals. All the work that has been done for Plan Houston, for Resilient Houston, for the Mayor's Complete Communities efforts, and as well as the voter-approved Metro Next plan. And based on those, the city stated a series of goals. City wants to serve the neighborhoods along the corridor. It wants to keep residents and communities whole. It wants to expand. It does not want to expand the right-of-way any more than is absolutely necessary. It wants to expand access to reliable transit options, enhance neighborhood connectivity, make travel safer for all road users, improve flooding on and off the freeway, and strengthen Houston's economy. And the county adopted a very similar set of goals with a resolution at Commissioners Court. Enhance walking and biking connections between and within existing communities, improving safety for people and vehicles walking and biking on the facility and on connecting streets, reduce historic flooding patterns, aggressively mitigate new flooding impacts, prioritize use of existing right-of-way, mitigate displacing residents and business owners by compensating their properties at fair market value, and help renters with rental relocation assistance. Preserve existing businesses and community resources while enhancing growth and economic development opportunities within neighborhoods adjacent to the project. Protect and enhance parks, open spaces, and air quality as critical to the physical and mental well-being of individuals, families, and communities. Meet the standards the flood control district has set forth and follow the requirements of Atlas 14. Encourage an engineering design for innovative multimodal transportation system and mitigate the damage to air quality and alleviate noise pollution as much as possible. Our goal in this entire design effort, in that first round of meetings where we heard concerns and opportunities, in the work our team did working together to come up with design responses for this, in the alternatives we presented to the community in the second round of meetings, was to reduce the negative impacts and increase the benefits of this project. We've identified a whole series of ways to do that: dedicated two-way transit lanes, frontage roads designed as city streets, safe ped bike crossings and keeping as many of those crossings as possible, opportunities for freight rail grade separation and relocation, flood mitigation on Halls Bayou, White Oak Bayou, programs for displaced residents and to ensure that the affordable housing supply is not reduced, and design exceptions to reduce displacement. That said, having done all of that, we set out to reduce those impacts, increase those benefits. We concluded that we could not do that simply by refining the project. If you look at the draft environmental impact statement, it stated that all alternatives would cause disproportionate high and adverse impacts to minority or low-income populations. And those are directly as a result of the widening of the highway. This is a project which would significantly widen the freeways that it touches. In segments 1 and 2 north of downtown, typically a 50% increase in footprint. That's 150 feet of additional highway width. And that directly leads to significant displacements. These are the DEIS numbers. You can see segment 1, 58 single family homes, 160 multifamily homes, 242 businesses with a total of 23,000 employees. Segment 2, 63 single family, 38 multifamily, 22 businesses. These are very significant impacts that are due directly to the widening of the highway. And we asked in that second round of public meetings, what's your preference for capacity and cross-section? And what we heard as an overwhelming response was the public saying, we want you to look at alternatives to fitting within the existing right-of-way of this highway. So we looked at multiple options for doing this, and all of them ultimately come down to a trade-off between 3 significant goals. One goal is adding capacity to the highway. One goal is bringing the highway up to current design standards. And one goal is minimizing displacements and neighborhood impacts. If you look at TxDOT's statement of goals, their primary goals here are adding capacity and increasing safety, which is taken to mean bringing the project up to current design standards. We came at this saying there is really a third goal here. It is protecting and enhancing neighborhoods. And what we did based on all of this input is say, what version of this project does that? And we think there's an alternate vision for segments 1 and 2 that can accomplish all 3 of these things: increasing the capacity of the highway, increasing safety, and having minimal displacement. So first of all, how do we increase capacity? First of all, rebuilding interchanges is an increase in capacity. Every time you have a left hand on an off ramp, every time you have merge lanes which aren't long enough, every one of those serves as a sort of bottleneck on the entire system. So bringing interchanges up to modern standards increases capacity. Secondly, rebuilding on and off ramps so that there are, once again, proper merge lanes, good geometry for those on and off ramps increases capacity. Adding shoulders increases capacity, especially if there is a crash and cars are able to pull over on there. We know that segment 3 serves as a bottleneck for this entire network. So segment 3 can actually help capacity in segments 1 and 2. Adding transit capacity and more transit service adds capacity, and giving more people access to transit adds capacity. 40% of the delay on the system is actually due to crashes. So you can see there's a strict relationship between safety and capacity. And Metro Next is proposing significant new transit service in this area. So what we suggested for segments 1 and 2 is a new vision which attempts to stay within the current right-of-way, which adds no single occupant vehicle capacity, but which converts the current reversible HOV into a 2-way all-day transit lane. Overall, that's actually adding 78% to the people capacity of the highway without adding to the number of single occupant vehicle lanes. And part of that is thinking about those lanes in the middle. We think that looking at transit-only lanes, as opposed to HOV lanes, as opposed to managed lanes, can lead to more reliable transit service, can lead to simpler on and off ramps. It makes it simpler to add stations along the way so that the neighborhoods benefit from that transit, and it can be built at lower cost with less right-of-way. But this vision isn't just about what happens with the highway main lanes. It's also what happens next to the highway. We said that the frontage roads along I-45 should be seen as parts of the neighborhood rather than as parts of the freeway. That means they are designed to city street standards, not highway standards, that they have safe pedestrian and bike facilities, not bike sharing lanes with cars, that they have more extensive landscaping, and even that sound walls are located next to the main lanes and between the main lanes and the frontage roads rather than between frontage roads and houses, which clearly makes those frontage roads part of the neighborhood and also means we have fewer gaps in those sound walls, which means they can be more effective. And so that is the vision that the mayor's letter puts forward. Keep the current number of main lanes in segments 1 and 2. Replace the current reversible HOV lane with two-way transit lanes. Add intermediate BRT stations so that the neighborhoods along the way benefit from that new transit service and so that local bus routes can have connections to that BRT. Bring exits and interchanges up to design standards, provide full inside and outside shoulders, and have the frontage roads typically be 2 lanes designed as city streets. So looking at that vision, how does that compare? Ultimately, it does not provide the same vehicular capacity that the TxDOT design does, but ultimately can provide more person capacity. In that more vehicular capacity, it may not do as much or will not do as much in terms of travel time for cars, but it does more for transit reliability. Both versions can really address the freeway flooding. We think ultimately widening the freeway less and incorporating more flood control features as part of the highway can mean that we can reduce neighborhood flooding as well. And clearly, this alternate vision uses less right-of-way, fewer residential displacements, fewer commercial displacements, and ultimately would be a less expensive project to build. And if we look at the goals that TxDOT started with, we would argue that this actually addresses those goals, though sometimes in different ways. That when we're adding capacity, if we think of capacity in person capacity rather than vehicle capacity, this is actually a way to add capacity. So we think this alternate vision is a project which would be a significant improvement over the current highway, as well as an improvement over what TxDOT has proposed. All of that leads to the mayor's letter. So on May 12th, the mayor sent a letter to the Texas Department of Transportation laying out what I just laid out. Got a response from TxDOT, from Laura Ryan at the Texas Transportation Commission within 8 days. And then notably, the county chimed in and Commissioners Court passed a resolution saying, we agree with these requests that are made in the mayor's letter. That letter includes general statements. It includes specific improvements in segments 3. And in segments 1 and 2, it includes a request for a study of an alternate lane configuration as well as specific improvements. What's in this letter is directly based on what we heard from you. Here you can see a matrix of the alternatives, nearly 40 of them that we showed in our last round of workshops. You can see how the public responded, and you can see what the outcome is in the mayor's letter. And in almost every one of these cases, what the mayor's letter does is ask for what the public asked for. You'll notice that some of these were more split. Some of these are things we feel deserve more work. For example, you'll see item number 16. We did not get a clear, resounding direction in either way. And so some of those need more work. But overall, we were able to take what the public said and say, this becomes the city's vision. So general statements, this project should be part of a regional strategy for freight movement that supports the regional economy while minimizing impacts on neighborhoods. Freight is an important part of what this highway does, and we think this should fit into a larger strategy. This project must leave residents and communities whole. That means ensuring all displaced residents can relocate in their communities and affordable housing supply is not reduced. That last point is critically important. This isn't just about making sure that the displaced residents have a place to move to. This is making sure that the supply of affordable housing in the neighborhood surrounding the freeway isn't decreased. Because if it is, everybody in those neighborhoods suffers from less supply. This project must not only reduce the incidence of flooding on the freeway, but also reduce the flood risk in the surrounding neighborhoods. There has been some very good work on this by the Flood Control District working with TxDOT. This project must retain and expand neighborhood connectivity, accommodate freight movement, and make travel safer for everyone, whether on a highway or a local street, on foot or on a bike or on a car. This is a transportation project for everyone that affects every mode of transportation. The project should minimize impacts on parks, facilitate the creation of new green space, and the design of the project should recognize the history and character of the surrounding neighborhoods. We should find every way we can to reduce and mitigate the significant air quality impacts that highways have regionally and on the neighborhood surrounding them. And design coordination statements. The city asked for design bid build on segments 1 and 2 to enable more control over the details of the design, continued coordination between city metro management districts, and a series of asks about construction. This is a project that will be under construction for over 10 years. And so what is the life in the city during construction is also essentially important here. And then we had a series of specific design proposals. This is starting in segment 3, two-way HOV on the Southwest Freeway, a better bridge for Cleburne, better design for detention in the 3rd Ward, improved bridges in the 3rd Ward, two-way HOV on the Gulf Freeway, mitigation for the closure of Polk, a cap park in Edo, accommodating railroad grade separation at Commerce Street, an underpass for Runnels, better ramp configuration in the northeast corner of downtown, better exits to the 5th Ward, a connection for San Jacinto, the Katy Freeway HOV connection. There are still unresolved issues here. We think that White Oak Bayou, where there are significant impacts on the White Oak Bayou Greenway, that there are design refinements which are possible there that we've been working through. And on the southwest corner of downtown, the ramps do not currently, as currently designed by TxDOT, do not work well for Metro, and we want to see what the alternatives might be there. In segments 1 and 2, what the letter asks for is the study of an alternative. So in other words, the city and the county are not saying we know the right answer for 1 and 2. What the city and county are saying is we believe there is an alternate approach for 1 and 2, and we would like a process to study those approaches. So that would be an alternative to rebuild the highway within the current footprint as much as possible, no added main lanes, replacing the current reversible HOV with two-way dedicated transit lanes, and design exceptions for lane widths and shoulder widths as required to keep the footprint within the current right-of-way, and reconstruction of interchanges and on and off ramps. And so that sets up a study, and that study would include a confirmation of goals. We want to start this by making sure we're all agreed upon what our goals are, the development of a new alternative along with any other alternatives that TxDOT may identify, and traffic modeling for the new alternative with agreement on the parameters for that traffic modeling. So as we've discussed already, we think we know what an alternative like this might look like, but we believe there is detailed design necessary in order to get to that point. This project should expand transit options. That means two-way all-day transit service, and we believe that's best done with dedicated transit lanes that can be used by the BRT as well as regional express service. That means that this BRT should be incorporated in the design of the project, and it should include intermediate stations, with Metro doing a planning study to identify the correct locations for those stations. And so ultimately what this project should enable is a bus rapid transit line that runs from downtown via North Shepherd and Greens Point to Intercontinental Airport, a much improved version of the current 102 bus. And we think that there are locations for additional stops along the way, which could serve the surrounding neighborhoods and connect to the local bus network. What might this look like? What might these transit lanes look like? Well, on the downtown end, we think these lanes would have ramps directly into downtown streets, leading into bus lanes on those streets. Then on the freeway, a series of intermediate stations. Here you can see what one of those BRT stations might look like. You can see it has 4 lanes next to it. It has inside lanes where the BRT can stop. It has outside lanes where park and ride buses, regional express buses can bypass. And then there's stairs and elevators from the BRT platform directly down to the streets below. Here's what that might look like on a section of elevated lane. So once again, connections to the street and those lanes that allow multiple vehicles to go through there. One of the real benefits of transit-only lanes is these stations are much simpler, and the people waiting here do not have a stream of carpools and other vehicles passing by them as they are waiting for the bus. Another real advantage of transit-only lanes is the ramps in and out of those lanes can be much simpler. So they can be straightforward T-ramps because the volume of traffic is much lower than it would be on a managed lane. On upper left, you can see what this would look like for a managed lane. And then finally, at the north end of the project, those lanes would lead to a direct ramp to Greenspoint Transit Center, which would be a hub for North Houston. The frontage roads and frontage road intersections should be designed as city streets and not highways, following city standards with an off-street bike path or shared ped bike path provided. So I've already mentioned this. I think we really want to see this cross-section look very different. And critically, we want to see the intersections look very different. These intersections are major safety issues. And so we want them to have safe bike and pedestrian crossings and intersections designed for moderate design speeds so that cars are not speeding around these intersections. And we want these crossings to be good. We want the experience of walking under this highway or biking under this highway to be a good experience. And then in segments 1 and 2, in addition to those general requests, a series of specific ones. Try to trim down the cross section at White Oak Bayou, a pedestrian connection at North Street, a better crossing at North Main, an off-ramp added for North Main, a whole project along Little White Oak Bayou, which would combine the freeway project with a flood control project to significantly reduce flood risk in the surrounding neighborhoods, and using whatever land needs to be acquired for flood risk to create a new greenway and hike and bike connection through these neighborhoods. No new frontage roads in Independence Heights, where there are no frontage roads today. And then going further north, continuing along White Oak Bayou, and along Halls Bayou, we heard a lot about local flooding here, elevating the frontage road high enough so that the frontage road is not regularly closed by flooding, and also creating a greenway along Halls Bayou under here. And finally, on the north end, the BRT connection to Greenspoint. So why do we think it's important to look at additional designs in segments 1 and 2? Why do we think it is worth reconsidering this part of the project? A couple of reasons. First of all, this project has significant impacts on low-income Black and Hispanic neighborhoods. And in that way, it builds on a long history. Historically, the highways that have been built in Houston, like across much of the United States, have had negative impacts on low-income minority communities for the benefits of others. If you look at the historical patterns of desegregation, if you look of segregation, if you look at the historical redlining maps, you will notice the degree to which these highways were planned through Black and Hispanic neighborhoods when they were first built. And we can look in Houston at the impacts that those had. This is I-45 being built through the 4th Ward, Freemanstown. On the left, you can see the commercial part of the neighborhood. On the right, you can see the residential part of the neighborhood, and you can see how the highway was bulldozed right through the middle of it. Not only did this highway take out a significant swath of the neighborhood, it transformed everything around it. Within a short period of time, that commercial heart of the neighborhood was entirely gone, replaced by an expansion of downtown, as this highway literally cut those commercial businesses off from the neighborhood that they belonged to. And all of this happened in an era where not only was there no kind of environmental regulations around highways, but we didn't even have the Voting Rights Act in place. That this was a period in which these neighborhoods literally did not have a voice in this. And you can see what happened. This is a section of the Fifth Ward as it looked immediately after World War II. Here is what that same exact area looked like when the Texas Highway Department bulldozed 2 freeways through it. This is what that area looked like when TxDOT further widened I-69. And this is what this would look like under this project. And what we note when we look at the analysis of this project is that this really was not taken into account. All of the alternatives in segment 2, which did not add lanes, were eliminated at a point in the process before community impacts were already evaluated. By the time the evaluation criteria considered displacements, all of the narrower versions of this project were already eliminated. And in that first screening, there is only one case where right-of-way was considered, which is right around the North Main Cavalcade area, which also happens to be the richest and widest segment of segments 1 and 2. It's a basic question here. Is it acceptable to have negative impacts on low-income minority communities so that others can have a better commute? And should this project mitigate its own impacts or also the impacts of the original highway? Do we take past injustice as a baseline, or do we try to remedy that? Secondly, traffic projections have not matched forecasts. If you look at the traffic report that this project was based on in 2014, looking at 2011 traffic numbers, the projections in that report have not held up. Traffic has actually gone down rather than increased. So one of the basic statements that this project is based on has not actually held up. You can look at projections for future travel time in here. See that the project is projecting a significant increase in travel time if the current highway stays. We don't know that that matches up with what's actually happening. And we also know that if we add capacity, it doesn't necessarily reduce congestion. This is the Katy Freeway. It was widened, which meant traffic sped up, but then the amount of traffic on the freeway close to doubled. And as a result of that, it's now moving slowly again. And adding capacity takes space. Those additional lanes are directly leading to homes and businesses being displaced. We need to consider impacts on local traffic. This project does things like remove the North Main off-ramp, which means people have to drive an additional 1.5 miles on surface streets. We need to understand the impacts that this project has on local traffic, because simply making freeway traffic better doesn't do any good if neighborhood traffic gets worse. We need to take advantage of the Metro Next transit improvements. Voters approved local bus improvements, BRT, two-way regional express bus service. The potentials of none of that were considered in developing these alternatives. And we know we can reduce impacts through design standards. Now, this stuff matters. Not having a merge lane matters. Left-hand exits matter. 40 miles per hour curves matter. Not having an inside shoulder makes a freeway less safe. But we think we really have to consider each of these, because bringing a freeway up to design standards also has significant displacement impacts. And we know different design standards, different aspects of this, don't all matter the same. So we think this also needs to be considered. We need to understand freight movement. The traffic studies for this project were really based on the movements of single occupant vehicles, but freight isn't going to the same places people are. And so if we really want to build a project which will improve freight movement, we have to understand freight movement. We need to consider safety for everyone. It's not just about the main lanes. It's about the frontage roads, and it's about all of that local traffic. If we look at crash data right now, you'll notice there's crash hotspots along the frontage roads on this project. This project done badly can actually make the streets of Houston less safe. So what are next steps on this? The city and the county have made this request. And the result of that was a vote at H-GAC on July 24th. And that happened in the Transportation Policy Council, a regional body for the 8-county region, 29 members, including cities, counties, Metro, TxDOT, which must approve all federal transportation funding. And when the city of Houston presented its request, the TPC then had 2 items on this project. One was an improvement of funding for segment 3, and the second was creating a working group for a memorandum of understanding. Here you can see the members of that working group. And over 5 meetings, that work group has developed and reviewed an MOU. Includes background, purpose, scope of work, agency commitments. The idea of this MOU is to create a process for working through these requests we've just talked about, to create a process for studying an alternate vision for this highway. And there will be a virtual public meeting this Thursday about that MOU. Having a good MOU in place is a way of ensuring this discussion we just had moves forward, of ensuring that the things the public requested get considered. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions that have turned up in the chat. I'm seeing if we have any. I am not seeing any questions right now, but we will be happy to continue answering questions later. So if any more come up, will Metro have any say or any dollars in these ideas? Metro has been part of this process all along. And while I'm not going to speak for Metro here, Metro has budgeted significant money for Metro Next dollars, for Metro Next projects, and therefore is anticipating being a part of implementing all of this. And if you're interested in the Metro pieces of things, Metro will be at the connections tables in our breakouts. Has this presentation been presented in full to TxDOT and TPC? Every bit of what's in this presentation is in that letter. So all of the mayor's letter requests I walked through are in that letter. And that has gone to both TxDOT and TPC, and there's been an abbreviated version of this presentation. Next question was, what happens to community comments provided to TxDOT and the FEIS? And that is the transition to where we're going next. Part 2, the FEIS. What is an FEIS? It is a final environmental impact statement. It is required by federal law. It must describe the project. It must describe what alternatives were considered for the project. It must document the impacts of the project, including impacts on communities, housing, business, transportation network, parks, natural environment. And it must commit to mitigation to reduce or offset those impacts when possible. Where we are on this project, in 2017, TxDOT posted what's called the DEIS, the draft EIS, which was followed by a comment period. TxDOT, based on those comments and the work it has done since, has now posted a final environmental impact statement. We are in the review period for that statement. On November 9th is the end of a 30-day review period. At the end of that 30-day review period, TxDOT can adopt a record of decision. The record of decision is the full federal environmental clearance. And once a record of decision is in place, TxDOT can complete the design and build the project. Once that document is in place, TxDOT has passed that hurdle. Any mitigation that is documented in the FEIS or ROD is then legally required as part of that project. So this isn't the end of design. TxDOT can continue to refine the design as long as it doesn't substantively change the project that's described in here. but it is a moment at which commitments are made. And if commitments are not documented, they are not binding in the same way. If impacts are not documented, they are not binding in the same way. So while this is not the end of a design process, it is not the end of the ability to change the project. It is a critical milestone at which TxDOT gets the go ahead to build this project. Start of construction, something like 2022, and then at least 10 years of construction on this project. The purpose of comments at this point, this is formally not a comment period, it is a review period. There already was a comment period in 2017. However, this period is intended as a way for the public to be able to see whether TxDOT addressed their concerns. So if you are making comments to TxDOT at this stage, the most useful comments are those that are very specific. For example, you could cite specific comments that TxDOT received and say, this response was not adequate in this way. Or you could refer to a specific point in the FEIS where you believe there is an incorrect statement. Those kind of comments are much more useful at this stage than making a general comment like, I'm concerned about this, and this project is bad for my neighborhood. This is the official how to comment. Like I said, comments you make in this meeting don't go to TxDOT. Your comments, if you want to comment on this, need to go to TxDOT. All of this information on how to comment is provided in a handout that we're calling a user's guide to this FEIS with more information for you on how to comment. Our team has been reviewing this document. 30 days is not a long time, and I will note that both the city and the county have asked for an extension on that period. But we have been scurrying as much as possible to get as much out of this document as we can. And what we are doing now is we are going to give you some of our early notes on this, things we have spotted in here that we think are interesting based on the comments we have heard from the public. This is a work in progress. These are not complete notes. This is only a cursory high-level review. And these are not comments from the city or the county. These are simply notes that the technical team has taken as we've gone through this document. The FEIS is a lot like the DEIS. This is what we expected. This is fundamentally the same format of document. And critically, this does not reflect the recent city-county work, though there are some requests we made which TxDOT did address, but those were largely because those had already shown up in earlier comments. If you look at TxDOT's responses to the comments, there's a lot of responses which basically say, we are coordinating, which can be a useful response, but is not necessarily a sufficient response. And we notice that there are some critical areas that have been resolved and some that have not been resolved. A major change in here, the DEIS said that all alternatives would cause disproportionate high and adverse impacts to minority and low income populations. The FEIS says that is no longer the case and gives a list of things that TxDOT has done to offset those impacts. Property. Displacement numbers have not changed significantly in here. There's a slight reduction in the number of housing units, slight increase in the number of businesses. There is a commitment of $27 million to support affordable housing, including apparently the construction of new affordable housing in the neighborhoods impacted by this project. And there's also a commitment to enhanced relocation assistance, including professional counselors, supplemental financial assistance, and workshops. There is also a stated goal in here to replace 70% of the units in Clayton Homes within 1 mile. This project impacts 2 Houston Housing Authority projects, Clayton Homes and Kelly Village. And currently TxDOT is working with the Houston Housing Authority on replacing those units, but notably that commitment to 70% within 1 mile. Despite the loss of taxable properties, TxDOT says this project will have a positive economic effect. The FEIS says that the impacts on EDO, which is basically one block width of Edo for the full north-south length of Edo gets displaced, bulldozed by this project, it says that depressing the freeway and providing caps would mitigate the impacts on Edo, but also says that the project budget does not include paying for those caps. There's a commitment to a commemorative park at Greater Mount Olive Missionary Baptist Church. On flooding, the FEIS is recognizing Atlas 14 rainfall data, says that TxDOT has reanalyzed the project in segments 2 and 3, but not segment 1 for that data. It also says that the project has been revised to account for the pre-Atlas 14 500-year floodplains. If you are interested in the wonky details of this, we'll discuss it more in the flooding group, but these are the current county standards. And this project will replace the culverts at 610 Patton and Cavalcade over White Oak Bayou with bridges. It also says that depressed sections of highway will be designed for large rainfall events, though it's not clearly stating exactly what the criteria for that are. Environment, there is a commitment to a weatherization and energy efficiency service program. There's also a commitment to an air monitoring program during construction, longitudinal tining on pavement because that makes less noise than transverse tining, and a general commitment to sound walls. Most of the discussion we saw in the DEIS about climate change is no longer in this document. Most of that section is gone. Including a specific analysis of the alternatives, as well as a discussion of how climate change might impact the project itself. The FEIS says that regional emissions will go down regardless of what happens with this project. And also says that while there may be local increases in pollution, there is no way to analyze those increases, so they are not documented. The FEIS acknowledges visual impacts on Bayou Greenways. There's a whole appendix on visual impacts, but says that these are not designated parkland and does not propose any substantive mitigation for that. There is some mention of small improvements, but nothing major there. The FEIS does not include a traffic study for impacts on local streets. There is nothing in this document to document how changing on and off ramp locations, widening the highway, rebuilding these roads, rebuilding these frontage roads would change local traffic. There is a mention of a comprehensive traffic study and an interstate access justification report, but neither of those documents are provided. It says that changes in on and off ramps, like I mentioned earlier, that North Main ramp going away, would not likely affect existing traffic patterns in neighborhoods. Again, no analysis to back that up. And it has numbers on the reduction in crash frequency and severity, but no explanation of where those numbers come from. In the fact sheets that TxDOT has put out, notes significant travel time reductions. Those significant travel time reductions are the result of projecting very high travel times in opening year if this project isn't built, like saying that if we don't build this project, it will take 103 minutes to get from the near north side to Midtown, which is a trip you can make in 16 minutes on light rail today. And it does not analyze trips on foot, on transit, or on bikes. The FEIS schematics are showing a 6-lane elevated I-10 express lane structure, which then connects in midair to an existing 2-lane elevated structure, which would involve 3 lanes of traffic merging down to 1. It's not clear how that was modeled for traffic. There is no commitment in here on how the managed lanes will be managed. On I-10, for example, carpool restrictions as well as tolls are used to make sure that the traffic in those managed lanes keeps flowing and that bus service remains reliable. This document says that the new managed lanes on 45 will not be tolled, but it doesn't make any commitment to how they would be managed or how the speed of those lanes would be maintained. In terms of connections, there is a proposal for separated bike lanes on frontage roads, but the schematics do not show that, and the text in different sections of the document do not match. The FEIS is proposing that feeder roads in segments 3 and 2, in other words, everything south of 610, will be designed to City of Houston standards, and that TxDOT is open to reconsidering the design and lane count of frontage roads, but that everything north of 610 in segment 1 would not be reconsidered and would be designed to standard TxDOT standards, and that the highway will be designed for a hike and bike path along Little White Oak and Maybe Halls. It does not propose any new connection to mitigate the removal of the North Street overpass. It commits to a new bike lane to replace the bike lane that's currently on Polk, which would be demolished as part of this project, but states that the new southbound frontage road between the George R. Brown mitigates the impacts on vehicular traffic. There is no mention of the impacts on buses. It says that Rothwell will replace Nance as the connection from the warehouse district to Jensen, but Rothwell is shown as a one-way street versus Nance being a two-way street. And it also says that Runnels cannot be extended within the proposed right-of-way of the project, which would mean a current connection being lost. It says the project will accommodate the San Jacinto underpass, which has been a long-time City of Houston request, but notably it does not show San Jacinto Street actually being extended to maintain the connection from San Jacinto Street to I-10. It says the project will accommodate Navigation Commerce underpass. The FEIS states that segment 3 would not permanently affect bus service, even though there are over a dozen bus routes operating on ramps or streets that would be eliminated as a result of the project that is shown in the schematics. The FEIS says that this project will eliminate the exit driveway from the Wheeler Transit Center, which means buses would literally not be able to leave the transit center, but does not commit to replacing that driveway. And the FEIS proposes to replace the current inter-Katy HOV with ramps off of the managed lanes and does not consider whether removing a barrier separate HOV ramp and replacing it with striped ramps on managed lanes would impact transit service. So with that, question and answer. A couple of questions here and going back through here. If it is documented in written reports that TxDOT hasn't adequately addressed public concerns, will the ROD be denied? TxDOT self-certifies its ROD. So TxDOT is required to produce a complete and accurate document and shouldn't be certifying a ROD unless it is. There are also federal agencies that have the opportunity to intervene. And obviously, legally, lawsuits can be brought against a project as well. Were your proposals modeled similarly? We're asking for modeling on alternative proposals for segments 1 and 2. How can I, as an individual, help convince TxDOT of the alternative you've laid out? Talk to TxDOT, but also importantly, talk to elected officials. Ultimately, TxDOT works for us. Let's see, when I clicked on the TxDOT website, it brought up some white papers could not be readable. Okay, so question from Mary Schultz. The full FEIS is on TxDOT's website. If you're having technical problems with this, contact TxDOT because that should be working. Is segment 3 going to be design, bid, build? Segment 3 is going to be in pieces, but pieces of segment 3, most of it, will be design build, but one segment will be design bid build. So what happens to community comments provided to TxDOT on the FEIS? Basically, TxDOT will receive those comments and decide how to act on them. But those comments are ultimately part of the record on this project. And like I said before, TxDOT isn't the only person you can comment to. This is something where federal agencies are involved. It's something where elected officials are involved. With that, we have breakout sessions to give all of you a chance to further dig into this project. And we have set up a series of breakouts on connections, on the environment, on traffic, on property, on flooding, where we will have technical experts able to try to answer your questions. And where you'll also just have a chance to talk to your fellow residents and stakeholders on this project about how you feel about this project. Like I said, we're not taking your comments here. Use these breakouts as a way to inform how you might respond to TxDOT, but ultimately comments need to go to TxDOT, not to us. What is going to happen here is you will be sent to the first topic choice you made when you were registered for this meeting. So in a moment, Madeline is going to hit a magical button and we will all be whooshed off to breakout rooms. If you would like to switch breakout rooms, you can always leave the breakout and you will find yourself back in the main room, which will be hosted by Peter Eccles from the city of Houston. He's happy to talk to you there, and he's also happy, along with Madeline, to send you to whatever breakout you want to be in. And so with that, we will launch the breakout rooms.